Both Blake Lively and the remaining Wayfarer parties have completed their pretrial filings. A lot of these filings are talking about which types of evidence or testimony each side thinks should be excluded. We've seen a lot of arguments to exclude the testimony of the experts that each side wants to bring, but there's one in particular I wanted to talk about, and that's Blake Lively's expert, Dr. Freyd, who is the woman who coined the term Darvo. And what bothers me the most about Blake Lively using Dr. Freyd is that it's taking this term Darvo and trying to apply some credibility to Blake Lively using this general concept and applying it to her situation. But Dr. Freyd is not a psychiatrist. She has never evaluated Blake Lively. She's never done any tests. What Dr. Freyd has done is tried to apply her Darvo concept to the same kinds of information, the court materials, the stuff we've seen come out about the case and the allegations that have been made, and assert her expertise with the Darvo concept as if she has any more knowledge of the situation than the standard person who's read through these court materials. Dr. Freyd is a researcher. Like I said, she's never performed a clinical evaluation of Blake Lively. She's never gone through her medical records. She hasn't spoken to the other parties involved. So at this point, allowing Blake Lively to hire Dr. Darvo makes her honestly sound like kind of a sellout. Because using the woman who coined that term is attempting to add some sort of credibility to her analysis of the situation, when the truth is, all she can do is analyze the information they gave her, which is the same stuff that's come out on the court's docket. She has no personal insight into Blake Lively's mental status during all of this. She has no personal insight into the mental state and the actions of the Wayfarer parties during this whole ordeal. And she's not considered other viewpoints, other positions on this. Dr. Freyd can't give you a credible clinical analysis of whether or not Blake Lively was in a Darvo situation with Justin Baldoni or the Wayfarer parties. She can give you the same type of expert opinion that a psychiatrist or a psychologist who's an observer on YouTube could give you. And from a general standpoint, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, from applying your type of knowledge and expertise to a situation to talk about, possibilities of what might have happened and explain it in a way that might help a layperson understand these concepts better. But when you slap some money on it and call that person an expert on the situation and put them on a stand to try to lend some credibility to the fact that Blake Lively was Darvoed to a jury, then it becomes a problem. Obviously, I personally would not find it appropriate for her to be used as an expert in a trial, but let's talk about why the Wayfarer parties say it's not appropriate and why they're asking the judge to exclude her from testifying at the trial. And I'm going to have to wear the big glasses, so I'm just going to turn the face cam off for the rest of this one. And I'm not going to read her entire expert report, but it is attached as an exhibit in these filings. So let me read you the summary of her opinion, and we can talk about why that's a problem, and then we'll go over why the Wayfarer parties want this excluded. So this is Dr. Freyd's summary. It says, based on the information presented to me, it is my opinion that 1, Miss Lively has experienced and continues to experience betrayal trauma, institutional betrayal, and Darvo perpetrated by Justin Baldoni, Jamie Heath, Steve Sarowitz, It Ends With Us Movie LLC, and Wayfarer Studios, with and through Melissa Nathan, TAG, Jennifer Abel, Jed Wallace, and Street Relations Incorporated. And 2, defendants' actions put Miss Lively at increased risk of the symptoms of distress consistent with research on the mental and physical health impacts of betrayal trauma, institutional betrayal, and Darvo. Now, it's not appropriate to slap an expert label on this and present it to a jury when she's never analyzed any of the people involved in this situation. She's never done any sort of clinical interview with Blake Lively. She's never conducted any tests or analysis beyond what she's read in the filings or the legal materials that Blake's lawyers have given her to analyze. And she's sort of taking the same thing that you might see like psychologists and therapists talk about in Twitter discourse when they're analyzing celebrity cases, and she's inflating it into expert testimony or potential expert testimony. And that's kind of hoping it will confuse the jury into thinking this is proof of Lively's claims when that's completely inappropriate. She's making huge assumptions about intentions, emotions, and behaviors of people she has never spoken to. So she's interpreting texts and assigning motives to decide who did what or who minimized what, and she's dressing it up as scientific insight. It's basically summing up Blake Lively's side of the story and then trying to make it sound like expert psychological insight. They're trying to tell the jury that they should just accept that the Wayfarer parties are abusers and that Blake Lively is the victim and that they should not evaluate the facts or weigh the credibility of the people involved because the lady who coined the term Darvo said so. And that's why I hate that experts can be bought, especially when it comes to behavioral science. It almost makes every psychological expert's opinion feel meaningless. I would also note that specifically with Darvo, it's a term that's been really popularized on social media, and people bend and stretch it to fit certain situations because it makes them feel better. Kind of like the word gaslighting in the way that it's overused and misapplied by people online. So it's not surprising to me at all that Blake Lively took a popular social media term and paid the person who coined that term to testify in her favor. I'm not going to read this whole thing word for word, but here's what the Wayfarer parties have said in their motion to exclude Dr. Freyd as a witness at trial. It says Lively offers Jennifer Freyd, a trauma researcher, to opine that Lively suffered betrayal trauma and institutional betrayal and is therefore at extremely high risk of such symptoms as suicidal ideation, hallucination, and self-harm, among others. Now, it's not right to say stuff like that when you've never done a clinical analysis of Blake Lively. And you wouldn't have a trauma researcher do that. You would have a doctor do that. So again, I feel like this is just not appropriate. The Wayfarer parties point out here that Lively expressly waived the right to offer expert mental health testimony because she didn't want to hand over her records for the defense to look at her mental health condition, and she withdrew her emotional distress claims and will not, argue anything other than garden variety emotional distress. She didn't want them to be able to see her records, her medical records, and to argue that they didn't cause the kinds of emotional damages she's trying to imply they caused. Now, I'm not saying she doesn't have any emotional damage, but that can totally be a result of her behavior, not their betrayal. She would need to prove that her emotional distress was a result of their bad behavior, not of her own and the consequences of her actions. Moving on here, the Wayfarer parties write, Freyd's opinion, formed without interviewing Lively, reviewing her medical records, conducting clinical tests, or speaking with her medical providers, is almost pure speculation and palpably unreliable. Third, Freyd essentially offers a closing argument in support of Lively based on her own interpretation of documents and testimony. Her theory is that defendants' conduct fits the pattern of Darvo, a term Freyd herself invented, about how perpetrators typically retaliate against their victims. None of this is helpful or reliable and will only confuse the jury. Again, I would note that Dr. Freyd has not met any of these people. It also unfairly prejudices defendants by bringing in a backdrop of unrelated conduct by others, none of which is at issue here. Freyd's testimony should be excluded in its entirety. And if she's only going to argue that she has garden variety emotional distress, then why is she bringing in a trauma researcher who's making huge conclusions based on incomplete information? And they point out here that Freyd is an academic researcher in the field of trauma response, but not a therapist or licensed clinician. And I just want to point out here that I'm not saying she's not a good trauma researcher. I'm not saying she's not good at her job. I'm saying her expertise is not appropriate for this specific situation, and it kind of feels icky that she can be bought. The Wayfarer parties right here. In reaching her opinions, Dr. Freyd did not conduct a clinical interview of Lively or perform any tests, nor did she review Lively's medical records or speak with her medical providers. Instead, Dr. Freyd has relied exclusively on the deposition testimony, pleadings, and other litigation materials provided by Lively's counsel. Here they're just talking again about Freyd's central opinion that she had betrayal trauma and institutional betrayal and the symptoms she's at risk of as a result. And then they move on to say, in addition to this not quite diagnosis, Freyd would opine on Lively's supposed low-level betrayal blindness, whereby Lively continued to give Baldoni the benefit of the doubt as he continued to make inappropriate remarks and violate Lively's boundaries. Again, this is totally inappropriate in my opinion. Just looking at one side of the story, basing this huge clinical opinion on something that's entirely non-clinical, which is like documents and materials from one side, having never talked to these people involved, or at least not in a clinical setting. They also note down here in a footnote that Freyd does not opine that Lively exhibits any of these symptoms or will in the near future. She merely speculates on a generalized risk. And that's all she could do because she's never talked to Blake Lively, at least not in a clinical setting. In Freyd's opinion, Lively oscillated between awareness of Baldoni and Wayfarer's toxic behavior and an understandable desire to hope for the best. Again, totally inappropriate to come to that conclusion and slap it as an expert opinion based on reading some papers about people you've never met. That is appropriate for online commentary and general speculation about certain behaviors when you have like general expert knowledge of the field and what these concepts are, what they mean. But it's wholly inappropriate to even imply that this is some sort of clinical expertise on these people in this situation. The Wayfarer parties go on to write, finally, Freyd would offer various narrative opinions, repackaging Lively's allegations and theory of the case under the guise of an opinion on Darvo. For example, Freyd would testify to her opinion that Lively experienced a pattern of retaliation and intentional reputation damage directed at her. She would offer her opinion that Baldoni's text to his friends downplayed her concerns while at the same time acknowledging that she was accusing him of sexual harassment. She would offer her opinion that Mr. Baldoni and Heath continued to cover up Lively's experience at a dinner with Colleen Hoover. Again, she wasn't there. She didn't talk to any of these people. She would give her opinion that Heath offered a performative acknowledgement of the women's experiences, recognizing them only to deny their validity and reassert his version of events. And that's ridiculous that they would try to pass her as an expert on that, having never spoken to Jamie Heath, knowing nothing about his character or intentions. That is a huge problem. She would explain her opinion that each time Miss Lively raised a concern, Wayfarer minimized her concerns and attacked her instead. She would give her opinion that Wayfarer engaged in further attack and RVO by causing the online smear campaign to commence with attack and RVO themes. And she's basing that on the assumption that they carried out a smear campaign, or what that even means, and also overlooks every single bit of her bad behavior. She's not going to consider any of Lively's wrongdoing. She's not going to consider any of Lively's texts to her celebrity friends, where she was attacking Justin and showing before they even started working on the film that she clearly wanted to take advantage. The Wayfarer party's right. This goes on and is all set up for the punchline. In my opinion, Wayfarer's entire defense in these proceedings is a classic example of Darvo. And it goes on to explain some of this in depth and like what the standard is for allowing this type of evidence. And I'm not going to go through all of that today. But I did just want to talk briefly about that and why it's such a problem to use this person as an expert to assert that Darvo occurred in a situation she has no personal knowledge of beyond the knowledge that somebody who's read the court filings would have. In this scenario they've invented with these conditions, the logic basically becomes that Wayfarer has Darvo'd Blake Lively if they deny what she says they did, if they defend themselves, or if they criticize her. They can't do anything, or this Dr. Darvo expert will call them abusers. There is no response that they could give to defend themselves that Dr. Darvo here would not call Darvo. And they're using this trauma researcher to try to reframe their pushback and defense of themselves as wrongdoing and abuse. And I find that incredibly problematic. I think this belongs on Twitter. I think it belongs on YouTube if you're the type of person who likes to give psychological analysis of these types of situations and these court filings, and that's how you feel about people based on what you've read. It is not appropriate to slap an expert label on it in front of a jury. But you guys will have to let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget, I have set up a fund to help me get out to New York and stay out there for the 3 weeks at least that it's expected to go. I understand a couple of the causes might be dropped if things go in the Wayfarer party's favor based on this new motion for judgment on the pleadings. But it's possible that I will have to be out there for 3 weeks. If I don't end up using the funds for that, then I'll save it for the Jones trial, which I plan to cover as well. I'm going to post a link to the Give, Send, Go and pin it in the comments so you can see it underneath the video here that you're watching. In the comments section, it'll be the top comment. So if you have some extra and you would like me to go report on that and you want to give and help out, that's great. If you can't, no hard feelings. I have absolutely no right or desire to demand money from anybody. I'm just saying, if you have extra money, you would like to see me go and do that and report back, I would be very grateful for any help you can give. That's all I got for now. Don't forget to hit the like button for me because it helps me out. And I'll see you all soon. Bye.